Oh God, no. Not again.
Oh, well, hi there, everybody. It's me, Tim, from Speaking from the Center. If you notice, there's no Nolan. Uh, he is having technical difficulties. We'll call it that. Uh, so we will wait and see if he shows up. Until then, let's talk. Let's talk news. Let's talk stuff. Let's see. Hold on. Let's get all the fanciness up there. Bam. Speaking from the center. And don't forget about the Patreon. Patreon.com/SFTC. And you too can provide Nolan with better internet service. Um, quick roundup. A couple of news topics to talk about. Number one, a Republican senator, one of the ones from Maine. Oh man, she's like always in the news. Susan Collins has said that she will vote for Joe Biden's pick for Supreme Court nominee, almost guaranteeing that Supreme Court nominee will be confirmed. Joe Manchin has also said that he will vote affirmatively. Mitch McConnell said that he cannot vote for Joe Biden's Supreme Court nominee for whatever crazy fucking reason. Like, she's the most qualified Supreme Court nominee that's been nominated in God knows how many years. But that's happening. So cool. Other news topics. The January 6th Commission has put out a rather interesting report that in the president's phone records, in the White House's phone records, there's about 7.5 hours missing. I'll give you a guess as to where those 7.5 hours were on January 6th during the insurrection. So the White House, the previous administration, is apparently involved in some sort of cover-up about what the president did or who he called during January 6th, 2021. So that's interesting. Don't know where 7.5 hours of phone records went. The current excuse is that the president used other people's phones. He used the phones of aides, and he used, like, I guess, intermediaries to talk to people. Because we know the president former President Trump had phone calls with such people as his staff and the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, and various other people, like Rudy Giuliani. So that's a thing. There's also been rumblings that there's enough evidence to convict the president and and several other people from the January 6th Commission with some sort of crime. Because, he did a crime and it was bad. We were going to talk about today on Speaking from the Center, if we get a Nolan. We were going to talk about some Russian war news because we've avoided that for at least a week, and now we're back to it. But this topic was supposed to be a little bit more not about the Russian war in Ukraine specifically, but sort of some of the European political ramifications of it. We were going to talk about the Helsinki Treaty and what's going to happen after the war is over with peace in Europe, and what the war has meant for several countries politically, and how they're going to interact with each other in the future. I don't remember enough of the names and whatnot. Nolan knows all that stuff, but I'll try. So what we're talking about is basically a treaty after World War II that the European nations came up with, saying that we're not going to go to war again. and it was a group of agreements between the countries as to how they would treat each other and how they would maintain peace. And basically, how they would maintain peace is by opening up their economies to each other, basically creating the European Union, or at least the framework for it, before the European Union actually existed. And finding a way for everyone to cooperate and coexist peacefully, because prior to that, oh, Europe just loved war. Boy did they, boy did they love fighting each other. Going all the way back to, I don't know, before the Roman times. Europe rather enjoyed going to war. There was always territorial disputes, political disputes, and various revolutions and uprisings. But after World War II, Europe decided that it had had enough of that and decided to make a peace agreement. I, I, I can't remember if it's specifically called the Helsinki Treaty, but that's what they did. And there was peace in Europe for since that agreement was signed, like 80 years or something like that. And the war between Russia and the Ukraine has absolutely destroyed that agreement. And it's caused a whole bunch of countries to rethink their positions, both militarily and geopolitically. It's forced nations like Finland to reconsider their neutrality with NATO, Finland and Sweden. It's also forced some other countries to rethink the size of their military. Countries like Germany, who have not had a large military since World War II, are now thinking maybe they should fix that because Russia is being a little aggressive. The same thing with Poland. Poland is the next door neighbor to the Ukraine. They've taken in more than 1 million refugees at this point, and they're fixing to increase their defense spending because they feel they must. And who could blame them? Poland has not had a great history with not being invaded. So I'm sure they would want to avoid that again. But, there's all the other NATO countries are having to rethink what exactly their part in the alliance is and how much to devote to the military spending. Because before this, during the 80 years of peace, countries had scaled back on their military spending because they had open trade relationships, open political relationships. The European Union was formed, which meant that all those countries were sort of binded together politically and economically. And it's the war between Russia and Ukraine has really put a strain on what Europe considers to be their role in the world. And Putin has decided that Russia should be the second superpower in the world, and try to diminish the United States, diminish Europe, and it's not good. But hopefully Nolan gets back on soon because boy, he's being missed. But maybe is that a Nolan? It might be. Let's give it a shot. Hello?
Okay, I'm here.
You're alive.
Sort of. We'll see how long this lasts.
So I gave sort of a rambling brief overview of the topic we were going to talk about.
Okay, what are we talking about?
The video you sent me about the Spirit of Helsinki.
Oh, good.
I don't remember the guy's name, so
Yeah, Uro Kekkonen.
um, and he was the guy who put it all together.
Basically, yeah. He was the longest serving president in Finnish history. He served from, I want to say, like 1950 something, 1956 until 1982.
Okay.
So he served for just under 30 years.
that's that's a long time.
Yeah, well, it was in 4 consecutive terms. So,
So he was like a regular Roosevelt. What's his name?
yeah, well, there was something like they did a thing where they extended the term limit in 1973, so he was able to serve from 78 to 82.
I see. So the opposite of FDR there.
Yeah, he was a bit of a uh, he may have been a bit of an autocrat.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, sort of like it was Finland during the Cold War, so it was complicated, but
Right. So I started talking about why this treaty or agreement happened in the European countries
right.
after World War II. Like they were like, let's stop going to
So
war with each other all the time.
what happened was after so this really started in the late 60s.
Okay.
What you had was there were a couple things that had happened by like 1969, right? Um, you had had the Sino-Soviet split, dividing the communist world's leadership between Moscow and Beijing. You had had Brezhnev's kind of blasé, um, stagnant leadership of the Soviet Union lose control over Western Europe's communist movements.
Okay.
And more importantly, you had the fact, and another thing that led to that was the fact that in 1968, uh, due to openings and reforms that were going on in Czechoslovakia, the Warsaw Pact, led by the Soviet Union, invaded Czechoslovakia, which made the Soviets very unpopular.
Right.
So Brezhnev kind of realized that they had lost a lot of prestige. There was a lot of tension, and this could end badly for them. So they wanted to start a new European Security Conference in the way they had done in the mid '50s. And unfortunately, nobody really wanted to hear about it from the Soviets.
Right.
Uro Kekkonen knew that Uro Kekkonen knew that with the shock of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in '68, Europe was tense, and he knew they were going to be looking for a way to kind of find a way to get past this and sort of ease the tension, take world tension down a few notches.
As
And to that
as one should.
yeah, yeah. And to that extent, he decided to start a diplomatic offensive of sorts to try to bring everybody together. Um, and initially, this was sort of a meh kind of response from the West. But given that Finland was willing to put in the diplomatic framework of doing things that hadn't really been done before, like not making the acknowledgement of East and West Germany a requirement, which back in then they could derail a diplomatic conference.
Right.
Oh, you want us to come, but you won't recognize East Germany? No, we're not going to. Oh, you want us to come, but you won't recognize West Germany? Oh, we're not going to come. The Finnish government, Kekkonen just sort of went, let's have them both here.
Right.
Um, and the big thing, so the big selling thing to the West was it was a way to put in a diplomatic framework for peace and peaceable resolution between rival military blocs in Europe. And for the Eastern Bloc, it was cementing the borders established after World War II.
Okay.
So those were um, the two big things that pulled in both sides to Helsinki. And Kekkonen used the fact that, as he kind of deduced, was that everybody who is running countries in Europe today lived through the horrors of the Second World War as younger people.
Right, yeah, I remember that from the video. Like, they were, they grew up during the Second World War. They were,
I mean, I'm
and then they
pretty
became
sure,
leaders of their respective countries.
yeah, I'm pretty sure Brezhnev served as a commissar on the front lines at Stalingrad. Gerald Ford had served, I think, in the Navy in the Pacific. Um,
Ugh,
everybody
I keep
to
forgetting
one,
that Gerald Ford was actually president.
yeah, everybody kind of does. You forget he was president. You just remember that he fell down a lot.
Yeah.
But by bringing about the fact that, like, we just dealt with this invasion in Czechoslovakia, this is not good. We need to not do this to ourselves anymore.
Right,
Because
yeah.
the Warsaw Pact invasion and occupation of Czechoslovakia was kind of a shock. It was one of the largest military operations to be conducted in Europe since 1945.
Right.
Or at least the previous Soviet invasion of Hungary in the 50s. So not unlike now, Europe got very rattled when nuclear-armed powers started invading neighbors.
Yeah, because
As,
that's not good.
yeah, as you do when that happens. So the real issue is that there were several major I actually have a list of them here of what the accords were. There were 10 points
Yeah,
that were
I
brought
was
up.
gonna ask. Like, I only saw it briefly, so I didn't get to read them all.
Sovereign equality and respect for the rights inherent in sovereignty.
Makes sense.
Uh, refraining from the threat or use of force. So a country is sovereign; it has control over its borders and over its uh, internal affairs. You respect everybody's sovereignty is equal.
Right.
Doesn't matter how big the country is, doesn't matter how small. Refraining from the threat of using force, telling them, well, you're going to let me in or I'm going to invade, is off the table.
Right.
The inviolability of frontiers, meaning the borders are set. These are the borders. The territorial integrity of states, meaning you can no longer carve chunks of them off because you want to make the line look prettier.
Man, this sounds like a whole lot of things that Putin has just stepped on.
Peaceful settlement of disputes, non-intervention in internal affairs, respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, including freedom of thought, conscience, religion, or belief, equal rights and self-determination of peoples, cooperation among states, and fulfillment in good faith of obligations under international law.
So, which one of those hasn't Putin violated?
None of them. He has violated every single one of them.
Because
Repeatedly.
all of those things sounds like stuff he's done in the last 2 months.
So here's the problem. At the time it was signed in 1975, every major and minor state in Europe, save for one, signed this document.
Who didn't sign it?
Albania.
Okay.
They were currently anti-Soviet, anti-West, and pro-China.
Albania was pro-China?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. They were pro-Soviet for a while, then they switched and they were anti-Soviet, or they were pro-Soviet and anti-Yugoslav, then they were pro-Yugoslav and anti-Soviet, Then they became anti both and went pro China for their communist credentials.
Wow.
Yeah. Every single state in Europe signed this. Both Germanies signed it and sat next to each other at the same table during this, which was historic. The United States signed it, Austria, Belgium, Canada, even Cyprus signed it. And I mean, like, Iceland is a signatory on this thing. So is Malta, Monaco, and I think eventually even San Marino and Andorra were allowed to sign.
So everybody but Albania.
Everybody but Albania. But more importantly, the Soviet Union signed this.
Right.
And after the breakup of the Soviet Union, all the successor states that came about agreed to, since they were under Soviet rule when it was signed, it still counted as them, and they all agreed to be part of it as well.
So like technically like Belarus was part of it and all these other countries.
Belarus, Ukraine, and the Baltic states, Moldova, all of these places that got their independence at the breakup of the Soviet Union are all signatories now. They weren't there in 1975, but that's like, no, but you were represented by the Soviet Union as you were one of the Soviet Socialist republics that made up the Union.
Right.
And now you're independent, and this extends to all of you as well. And they all agreed.
So then what the fuck?
That includes Russia. The Russian Federation under Boris Yeltsin agreed to continue on in the spirit of Helsinki with being part of those 10 articles that make up. It was actually called the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe, the CSCE,
Well,
or the OSCE, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe.
so all right. So before before Russia invaded the Ukraine, had anyone violated this treaty in the last 40, 50 years?
No.
So Putin decided fuck all that shit and
For 40, 42,
yeah, it's like 42
45,
years.
45 years.
45.
Yeah.
So why he done this?
I don't know. Other than the fact that he thinks he's better than everybody else. So what it comes down to is, oh wait, I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm looking at another list here.
Oh.
Albania did join the pact
Eventually.
in September of 1991.
So around the fall of the Soviet Union, they decided.
Yeah. Oh, it also now includes Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Bosnia Herzegovina, all those places that broke off of Yugoslavia when it fell apart. And it also includes. So there are some countries that are part of this that, it kind of makes sense. Like Australia eventually signed on for all this.
Mm-hmm.
Or no, I'm sorry. They're a partner for cooperation, but non-signatory. Countries that are in it that are non-signatory are Mongolia and Macedonia.
Why Mongolia?
I don't know. I do not know.
It's sort of
but they're
like,
in it.
It's sort of like a weird place to be because all right, China's not signed on to this, right?
No, it's the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe based on the Helsinki Accords. Why in God's name Mongolia is involved in this is beyond me.
Is Mexico a signatory on there?
Nope.
Not Mexico, huh? They just like
Yeah.
doing their own thing.
I guess. Very strange. Putin has essentially thrown all that out the window for this invasion. His justification is bullshit. He has no justification. The encroachment of NATO, all this nonsense.
The
He
the
signed
denazification of Ukraine.
with their democratically elected Jewish president.
Yep, that guy.
Just keep that in mind. A internationally observed free and fair election that saw a Jewish man elected to office at the head of a Nazi state. Sure, why not?
All right. Well,
Um,
I mean, let's talk about for a minute like the implications of the agreement itself. Like European countries opened up their basically opened up their markets, opened up their borders. The European Union was formed,
yeah.
and
So,
their militaries, for the most part, have decreased because they don't need them, essentially.
yeah. I mean, there was talk in the early 90s of Germany just completely disbanding the Bundeswehr, the German military, in exchange for just an enlarged police force.
Right.
Because what else were they going to need it for? The idea of war in Europe on the scale that we're seeing now in the Ukraine was thought to be impossible. Like, not that countries couldn't do it, not like they didn't have the means anymore, but just this framework of cooperation fostered by Uro Kekkonen in 75 had been the guiding principle for the last 40 plus years.
Every time you say his name, I think Kikoman. But you're right, and a lot of countries reduce the size of their militaries. This agreement is why a lot of European nations didn't join in America's invasion of Iraq.
Correct. Yeah. All of these principles laid out in this are anathema to that, you know, that sort of thing, that sort of warfare style.
So now that Putin has essentially shattered that agreement, what is the future for European peace? Essentially, like the war's going to end at some point, whether it goes Russia's way or not.
Yeah. At some point, the war will end. And the problem is, I guess, based on what he saw as, I guess, from Putin and the Russian perspective, and specifically from Putin's perspective, I think it has to be taken into account. From one person's perspective, which guides the entirety of Russia's 144 million people, um, Europe was weak.
Right.
Their military spending was low. They were sort of part of NATO still. Uh, when Russia attacked Georgia in 2008, Europe kind of shrugged.
Right.
When they occupied the Crimea in 2014, Europe dithered and sort of shrugged, you know? So in his mind, Europe was disunited, apathetic towards conflict. They weren't spending on their militaries. They weren't working together. They were just sort of, well, whatever. We're all making money now. Who cares?
Right.
And part of that, and this is where I think Russia maybe got the wrong idea, part of that was their willingness to do business in Russia. Every major European nation was willing to do billions of dollars of business within Russia. And from the European side, this was seen as, oh, well, we'll integrate them into our markets.
Right.
And this will make it less likely and very costly for them to start a war. So it'll be less likely the Russians won't. So the Europeans are thinking they've got this. Germany was setting up a second pipeline to bring Russia's oil and gas reserves into Europe. And the Europeans were something like 40% of their energy
Yeah.
was coming from this Russian pipeline, which is why the Germans were working on building a second one. So from the Russian perspective, it's like, oh, good, they're dependent on us now. And they make all this money. They won't dare jeopardize all that.
Right.
So we've got leverage that we can use. So for the Europeans, they were like, oh, we'll bring them in and we'll integrate them. They won't want to start a war if they're making money with us. And the Russians went, oh, good, they're making money with us. That means we've got leverage. They won't dare risk it. Are you okay over there?
Yeah, my glasses are fucking crooked. I don't know how to fix them.
Maybe it's not the glasses, Tim. Maybe it's your head.
There we go. That's better.
So that's you've got two different schools of thought. Putin is looking at this as a Russian would, quid pro quo. I give them gas, they give me money. If I shut off the gas, they don't have fuel, and I can do that. So this is leverage. All the money they're making with me and I'm making with them, it's leverage.
Right.
The Europeans are thinking, well, we've already basically outlawed war with the Helsinki Accords and the, Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe has made it so that wars like this just won't happen anymore. So let's integrate them economically to further push that idea away. And that's basically where this fell apart. The Europeans were thinking, no, we've signed these accords. We've lived with them for the last 47 years. This is the way it is now. And the Russians were going, no, we've been working together and making money off of them for the last, arguably, only about 30 years. This won't happen again. They won't dare risk it. So the Europeans had figured the Russians wouldn't risk the war, and the Russians figured the Europeans wouldn't risk the money.
And the Russians decided, fuck it.
Well, they were thinking that economic stuff would give them leverage over the Europeans. The Europeans won't really go after us. Look what they didn't do when we invaded Georgia. Look what they didn't really do when we annexed Crimea. They're weak. They're not going to give up this source of revenue and fuel. We've got the advantage. They'll never risk the money and the inconvenience.
I mean, I think
it's almost like appeasement failing all over again.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, the Russian military being put on the Ukrainian border was a semi-bluff from Putin when he started making demands. And then when Europe was like, okay, fucking do something. Like, we're not going to just hand over Ukraine to you and have them disarm and just make them a part of your country. Like, that's not how everything works. And then when, he saw that Europe wasn't going to budge on it, he was like, well, I guess I have to invade now.
Yeah, he went, well, fuck it. I guess we're invading. And boy, did they fuck that up. So Poland, or I'm sorry, Ukraine is officially either at or has just beaten Poland for surviving alone in a war.
Yes.
Poland survived 35 days in World War II. I think Ukraine is just past that now.
Yep. And the Russian military is having to reorganize in order to be better at fighting a war. They're pulling back forces from Kiev so that they can reorganize and try and link up with forces from the south.
Yeah. I mean, the Russians managed to occupy around 15% of Ukraine's total territory.
Yeah.
But they really just did not have the logistics or the organization. They didn't think any of this would happen. They figured Europe would cave, or if you're in Europe didn't cave, 48 hours. And, you can't, it's not like Axis and Allies or Hearts of Iron. You can't just throw more troops in when a battle goes.
It was kind of like Hearts of Iron, because as soon as they went to war, all their logistics and organization went to shit.
Yeah. But they didn't think, I'll just send everybody in. What? You can't send everybody in. We don't have the trucks for that.
But yeah, a lot of that convoy that had been just stationed like 20 miles outside of Kiev, they're now pulling back those troops so they can essentially resupply them, reorganize them, and send them south.
Yeah.
They're going to avoid a large confrontation in Kiev right now, so that they can sort of marry the two armies that they have and push for Kiev once they're done with that.
Yeah. The problem is, so Russia is disregarding every single one of these things. And Europe has responded by rearming, re-equipping.
Yeah.
And And really, instead of breaking apart and not being willing to risk the money and the inconvenience, Europe is like, we're essentially, Russia may have inadvertently just created its own worst enemy.
Yeah, and armed and pissed off Europe.
An armed and pissed off Europe willing to take no more bullshit from the Russians,
Yeah.
um, who have a GDP and a potential political influence that dwarfs any other power in the world right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you take all the European Union countries into account, just the European Union countries, not all the signatories of the agreement, they're the world's largest economy.
Yeah.
They beat China, they beat us. If they put all their economic power together, they're the tops.
And a military that they could put together, which they're going to have to if the Russians are going to do shit like this, means you have democratic a major democratic nuclear armed power that can confront people like Russia and others. And the
Yeah.
question is, where do they go with that? Like, it's one of those things where Americans, as Americans, a lot of us are like, woohoo, Europe's finally getting their shit together and they're going to be a military power again, which means less responsibility and need for America to shoulder the burden. Europe's going to start picking up the slack,
Yeah.
which we're all on board with until Europe does something we don't like. Because Europe picking up their own slack means America's influence is going to naturally diminish.
Yeah, right. We won't have all those military bases over all over Europe. And
Or our military bases will be of less significance because Europe will be able to do it for themselves.
right. And
And
and I believe, we said that Germany was putting a lot more money into their military, and so is Poland.
yep, by in the next 10 years, Poland might have one of the largest and most sophisticated armies in Europe.
And that is crazy.
Yeah. Well, and here's the worst part. They don't have to direct it westward.
Right. It can just
100% of that
yeah.
military strength can be pointed east and basically,
Well, I mean that basically means like the fortification of Poland.
yeah. Well,
And
not only Poland. So the biggest threat there is the gap between Poland and Lithuania,
right.
because there is between Poland and Lithuania. So there's this little area called Kaliningrad, which is the remnants of East Prussia. That was once Königsberg. That is an extraterritorial area still held by Russia.
Yeah, I've seen that on maps and I was like, what the fuck? Why does Russia own that little spot right there?
After World War II, when the Baltics were re-annexed in by the Soviet Union, that little strip of Germany by East Prussia and around the city of Königsberg was annexed directly into the Soviet Union for
All right.
whatever reason. And when the Soviet Union fell apart, instead of Poland taking it or Germany taking it, it just kind of sat there as a defunct part of Russia.
That's so weird. Like, who thought that up?
Yeah, I know. Nobody else wanted it. It was like hot potato for the crap pile, and nobody wanted it. Since then, the Russians have turned it into an air force base, a naval base. They've packed it with anti-air and anti-tank missile forces, and keep a percentage of their special forces deployed there.
So weird.
Yeah. So the problem is, from there to Belarus is not that far,
Right.
and the Russians have the ability to cut off or interdict that strip of land in Lithuania between Poland and the rest of the Baltics, and could, in theory, cut the rest of the Baltics off from NATO.
Right.
Now, given how badly they've done in the Ukraine, could the Russians make it that far and link those two areas up and close that corridor? I think the answer is no.
Okay.
I don't think they have the military capability.
Yeah,
I think they
probably
could
not.
defend that strip of land and make it an absolute nightmare to take with huge casualties if anybody managed to do it. But do I think they could push out and actually cut Poland off from Lithuania and isolate the Baltic states? No, I don't think that's a thing that Russia can do.
But so all right, so let's say that Europe continues arming itself. Germany becomes a major military power again. Poland becomes a major military power, and countries like Finland, the Republic of Ireland, and a few other countries decide that they are no longer neutral towards shit. That they really seriously want to be a part of whatever new European alliance happens.
I mean, I could see Finland going for that. Finland has been a neutral place for a long time, but I don't know if they can afford to take the risk. The countries that I worry about maintaining neutrality are basically Sweden and
Right,
Austria.
right,
And Austria is not part of NATO. They are part of the EU, but they're not part of NATO. Sweden has had unparalleled success around the world as diplomats.
right,
They were key in the South African Accords that ended the apartheid government without bloodshed or violence.
right,
They are one of the key leading negotiators to maintaining a peace between Israel and Palestine. Joining up in a general European alliance means complicit approval of whatever the European powers' position or stance becomes on a given issue.
right,
So if all of Europe, or if everybody in Europe but Sweden decides, fuck you, Israel, leave Palestine alone, Sweden can no longer be that negotiator in good faith
right, right.
because they are part of the alliance, which means even if they publicly don't approve, as long as they're part of that alliance and benefit from it, they tacitly do approve.
Because they have that political alliance now that
Yeah,
whatever the rest of Europe says, they kind of have to go along with, even though it wouldn't be sort of a willing thing.
right. The other one is Austria. And Austrian independence is very important because they are the seat of the IAEA,
What's the IAEA?
the International Atomic Energy
Oh, yes,
Agency.
that stuff.
Yeah, they are crucial because they are a neutral state in their ability to negotiate these and keep the spread of nuclear technology to a minimum. They're deeply involved in keeping Iran from getting nuclear weapons right now and being involved in the Iranian nuclear talks.
Right.
And their main goal is nuclear non-proliferation, meaning less people having nuclear weapons. And they need that neutrality to be able to do that.
Now, isn't this is going to sound like weird, but isn't one of the reasons that Russia decided to invade the Ukraine is that Ukraine no longer has nuclear weapons? They did for a bit after they left the Soviet Union, and then they were forced to give up their nuclear weapons.
They gave up those nuclear weapons in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like the Soviet Union collapsed in like 1991, and like immediately the world said to all those Soviet states that, or those former Soviet, now independent states that just so happened to be where Russia was, where the Soviets were keeping their nukes, to be like, no, you either need to give those back to Russia, or so
yeah.
yeah, or we're gonna have issues. You either give them back to Russia, or you get rid of them.
But if
So
if Ukraine was allowed to, I mean, that'd be crazy. But if Ukraine was allowed to keep their nuclear weapons, would Russia have still invaded?
so I don't know, maybe not. But part of the reason Ukraine agreed to give the weapons back was Russia agreed to never invade Ukraine.
So,
So
what the fuck?
yeah, no, there is no justification. The talk of NATO expansion or any of the other bullshit talking points pro-Putin media has put out there is bullcrap. Russia agreed to the Helsinki Accords. Therefore, meaning the use of force to resolve territorial disputes was no longer a viable option and would no longer be recognized. And then in the 90s, in 92, when Ukraine agreed to hand Russian nuclear weapons back, the Russians also agreed that they were only getting these nuclear weapons back on the understanding that Russia would never invade them. International law and agreement does not apply to Vladimir Putin because he says so.
Right. And him breaking an agreement that Russia made, and even though it wasn't Putin, it was Boris Yeltsin. Even though breaking an agreement that they directly made with Ukraine, saying that if you give us our nuclear weapons back, we won't invade you ever. Like,
Yeah. No, there is no justification for this.
so, all right, so Europe rearms itself, um, and some countries that were previously neutral in other military alliances stop being neutral because they don't have a choice.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, also I heard that the Republic of Ireland has a neutrality that allows them to put peacekeeping troops places because they're so neutral.
Yes. I though that's through the United Nations.
Right,
And
but
I feel like the UN, I feel like they could still do that
right,
even without, you know, even if they were to be part of like a NATO style or an EU style military alliance.
yeah,
I feel like their commitment to NATO could still be met because, or their commitment to the UN could still be met because there are plenty of other NATO nations that have also been part of peacekeeping
yeah,
operations. So that one I've heard that said as well, but like, so what? Like, there are plenty of countries that are part of NATO that have contributed to UN peacekeeping.
right.
Canada is a major part of NATO, and they have routinely sent troops all over the world
Well, they're
for
so
NATO.
nice. They're so nice up there.
I mean, according to you, so is Ireland. So, I mean, I don't see why they can't be part of NATO. And also,
Is Ireland Europe's Canada?
you tell me, you've been there.
I don't know. They are very nice.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been
You
to
know what? I think the
you know
difference
the
is
people in
they're,
Canada aren't as nice as the people in Ireland because I've been called a stupid American in Canada, but not in Ireland.
yeah. Also, you know the difference is the Canadians only really get narky and mad when it's about hockey. And you don't car bomb somebody over a lost hockey match.
Only if you're in America. Well, not
No,
hockey,
no.
but baseball or football, whatever. If
No,
your
no, no, no,
team
no.
wins, you start rioting.
There's a big difference between a riot because of a sporting event and blowing up a building with a car bomb. Okay. And I think that's the difference.
I see. There's a level of aggression there that is just different.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what happens? Man, I did have a fucking question and now it's gone. Um, so you said earlier that Russia may be inadvertently creating its biggest enemy
Yeah.
through this war. Now there have been talks all week, last couple of days, about President Zelensky accepting some sort of neutrality agreement, saying that they won't join NATO if Russia just stops.
Yeah. I
And
mean, I think in order for him to accept that, Russia would have to be willing to like get out of all of their territory.
yeah, and there's negotiations and peace talks going on, but let's say that Ukraine gets to keep most of what it has. Maybe the
Hmm.
Donbass region becomes Russian, and the rest of Ukraine remains whole minus Crimea, and then the Donbass region. And now Ukraine is a neutral state. They're not going to join NATO. Maybe they can't join the European Union. I don't know. Uh, does the Ukraine become some sort of like neutral zone between Europe and Russia?
I mean, it's possible. I don't know that the Ukrainians would be willing to accept that, but Yeah, I mean, I think that's what the Russians are hoping for at this point. Russia is hoping for its territorial expansion in the Donbass and the Crimea to be legitimized and recognized, and for the Ukraine to, if it's not going to join them, it joins nobody.
Right.
But here's the problem. That's not going to happen. I mean, Putin has already stated he doesn't believe Ukraine is an independent nation.
Right. He considers it part of Russia
Russians
historically.
and Ukrainians are the same people. Ukrainians should be speaking Russian. Like, no,
Yeah.
he's not going to accept those terms. It's Ukraine is his girlfriend, god damn it. And if she doesn't like that, he's going to go to her house drunk and beat her to death. Or what they call in Russia is a friendly hello.
Uh-huh.
But that's it. That's their option. And the Ukrainians aren't going to accept that, and I don't think they should. I think when the war ends, if Ukraine is like, hey, you know what, we're going to join the EU now. Like, I mean, if a whatchamacallit, an independent, neutral group, Ukraine can't do that,
Right.
and why would the Ukrainians limit themselves and give the Russian that kind of
Well, I
influence?
mean, they've already submitted, I guess, an application to be part of the European Union, and they're like, "Hey
Yeah, and
guys, can you fast track this for us real quick before we're not a
yeah,
country anymore?"
yeah,
Um, yeah, I mean, it goes back to what you said, like when this all started. Like, if America, or not America, if NATO had just been like, "Yeah, Ukraine, you're a NATO country now. Russia, what the fuck are you gonna do about it?"
yeah. It's that's kind of what it comes down to is we have to see in the long term where Europe's going to go with this now that the assurances of the Helsinki Accord are gone.
Right.
And knowing that that makes now a more volatile time in Europe than the Cold War is fucking astounding.
Yeah. And Europe's gonna have to find a new way to be peaceful.
Well, I mean, like, I think the EU and the Eurozone and all that economic stuff will keep what we think of as Europe proper together.
Yeah.
And, it's not like France is going to invade Germany and Norway's going to attack Sweden like tomorrow because of this. But it means that they can no longer be assured that a larger power or somebody among them won't try this shit.
Right.
Um,
Well, I mean, specifically like Russia, like there's
yeah,
there's been talk for since the war began about, ooh, is Russia gonna stop at the Ukraine? Watch out,
Moldova
Moldova. Watch out,
and East
Poland.
Turnitsia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like what if Putin gets the Ukraine as a whole? Where does he go next? What does he do now?
yeah,
Does Moldova historically Russian?
yes.
So
And remember, East Turnitsia is the only part of the Soviet Union that still exists.
right, but I mean, uh, you know, China has largely stayed out of it. And when pressed on it, China's like, we don't want to fucking deal with that at all.
Please bother somebody else.
Please leave us alone. We're trying to do our own thing. But without any sort of intervention, what
Yeah,
is Russia gonna do without some sort of agreement?
yeah,
And where does that leave the rest of Europe?
yeah.
Like there's been a little bit of, I don't know what Putin, or not Putin, god damn, Biden, over the weekend said that Putin needs to be deposed. They need to get rid of him, and that stirred up some shit.
Yeah,
And
I don't doubt that,
but all these European border states with the Ukraine now are very troubled by what Putin is going to do once this war is over.
and Putin should be worried about that because what those states are going to do in response to his aggression,
Yeah,
because you're going to see NATO and Europe strengthen its connection and its militaries.
Yeah.
Meaning, if Putin gets through this Ukrainian nonsense in one piece, which is debatable.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I mean, think about it militarily. Like, Poland wants to give its fighter jets to the Ukraine. That may or may not ever happen, but certainly Poland and some of those other border states are going to have a lot more fighter jets now. Like,
yeah,
whether or not they give them to the Ukraine isn't going to be of any consequence once they have twice the number of them.
yeah. Well, and that's the problem. And I'm willing to bet that part of the reason Biden went to Poland and all that was to hammer out
Yeah,
the deets on getting those fighter planes to the Ukraine.
right.
Spray paint them blue and yellow and ship them.
Can we roll them across the border and just have some Ukrainian fighter pilots on the other side? We'll push them, and they just have to get them at the other side. Like, we won't physically be in there, but you
Yeah.
know.
I'm willing to bet they're going to figure out how to do that.
Oh no, we lost a couple of fighter jets. Where did they go?
Oops. They went missing.
So, a ship and a fighter jets didn't make it. I don't know where they went.
Wherever could they have gone?
And it's not like it's stopping us from. I heard that America has to ramp up some of the production of the weapons we've been giving to the Ukraine because we're running through our stocks of those weapons by giving them to them.
That is surprising. Well, and it also makes sense when you think about it because there's a good bet that a lot of that stuff we're not actively using. So we're just
Right.
giving them the leftovers.
Yeah.
And we're like, well, crap, we're almost out of the leftovers.
Right. I heard the anti-tank, the Stinger missiles, the anti-tank
Yep.
weapons. Like, we have to buy some more because we ran out or we're running low or something like that. The same thing with the anti-aircraft missiles, the javelins. Like, there's
Oh
going to
boy.
be, whether or not like we actually use them in the future, there's going to be a ramp up of military production in America, and we already have a bloated military budget.
That's what we need, Tim. We need more military spending.
Well,
Uh,
um, in here in Connecticut, the Sikorsky aircraft, they make the Black Hawk helicopters. They're about to get a new contract to get a helicopter to replace the Black Hawk. So the military is essentially ordering uh, uh, an entire new helicopter fleet, and that's just coming across the wire like the last week or so.
nice. What could go wrong?
But I mean that kind of stuff is probably happening, all over in the defense sector. There's probably a whole ramp up of production of things that they didn't think they would need that they've been sending over to the Ukraine.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's a big pot of that going on. But so I mean, at the end of the day, with the Helsinki Accords abandoned, Europe is kind of free to reassess how it wants to handle this stuff, and a EU military is a very real possibility. And it's funny too because Britain was all like, "Yeah, Brexit, we're out of here," and then you know, Russia invades the Ukraine, and because of security concerns and the way the treaties work, Britain is now going to be more closely drawn into Europe rather than being able to kind of break away from Europe, not for political reasons or economic ones, but because of military concerns.
Right.
Because Britain knows that they can't ignore European military affairs, because doing that leads to bad consequences.
Right. Well, you got to watch out for that North Sea Navy.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely part of it. That's part of it.
But yeah, I mean, Britain had this whole fucking. Well, they didn't have a plan. They just kind of fucking did it. But they had this whole vision of them not being economically tied or politically tied to the European Union anymore. And now
Yeah,
they're gonna have to be militarily tied to them because if they're not united with Europe, what are they gonna do?
yeah. How does this help them in the long run? And the answer is it doesn't.
So we made it to an hour or so.
Yes.
So I'll do the closing stuff here. Let's see. Patreon.com. Go there. Subscribe and follow us on the Twitch in the Bin Podcast and subscribe to the Bin Podcast. Do all the things. Send us the bits. I don't even know. But patreon.com/SFTC if you want to become a Patreon subscriber. We're going to start putting up clips and whatnot on there again. I've ignored it for too long. But
For too long.
Too long. I don't know, maybe we'll do like some exclusive content to get things going there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's it for this episode of Speaking from the Center.
Hooray.
I was Tim. That was Nolan.
For a little bit, anyway.
Oh, if you want Nolan to have better internet, put money in the Patreon.
I just need to get my other computer set up.
Help us help Nolan.
I have this $1,000 computer. I just don't know how to get all that going on there.
All right. See you next Wednesday, 8 p.m.